A rich businessman tried to humiliate a homeless man on the street. But what he didn't know, this man once saved dozens of American soldiers. What happened next became the billionaire's greatest regret of his life. It was another busy morning on Fifth Avenue in New York City. The streets pulsed with energy, luxury cars hummed by, polished shoes clicked on the concrete, and briefcases swung in rhythm with hurried businessmen. Towering glass buildings reflected the bright morning sun like proud monuments to wealth and success. Among the river of people moving through the street, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up alongside the curb. The door was opened by a private chauffeur, and out stepped Charles Whitaker, one of the wealthiest real estate moguls in America. Charles was everything the magazines loved to feature: sharp-tailored suit, gold cufflinks, perfectly styled hair, and a watch worth more than most people's homes. His business empire stretched across several continents, and his name was often seen in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and televised interviews about American success. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, his personal assistant, Megan, followed closely behind, tablet in hand, giving him a rundown of the day's meetings. "Your 10 a.m. with the investors is confirmed, sir. The mayor's office luncheon at noon, and the charity gala tonight at the Ritz." Charles barely nodded, his attention not really on Megan. His eyes, instead, drifted across the street, where a man sat slouched against the wall of a building. The man was older, his clothes dirty and torn, a scruffy beard hiding much of his weathered face. His shoes had holes, his jacket barely hanging together, and a cardboard sign lay next to him that simply read, "Homeless veteran. Hungry. Anything helps." The contrast between Charles Whitaker and this man could not have been more extreme. The billionaire sneered, almost amused, at the sight. People like him had worked hard for what they had. They deserved their place. And then there were people like this, failures, burdens, reminders of weakness. "Pathetic," Charles muttered under his breath, but loud enough that Megan heard. She glanced at him nervously, unsure how to respond. Charles adjusted his jacket and smirked, walking directly toward the homeless man as though drawn by some sick curiosity. The people nearby slowed down, sensing something about to unfold. Some passers-by pulled out their phones, always ready for the next viral moment. As Charles stood over the man, he let out a short laugh. "Well, what do we have here?" he began, his voice dripping with arrogance. The homeless man looked up slowly, his deep brown eyes meeting Charles's. There was no anger in his gaze. No hatred. Just tiredness. But there was something else too: dignity. The kind that survives even when everything else is stripped away. "You know," Charles continued, speaking loudly so others would hear, "I see people like you every day. Sitting on these streets. Begging. Waiting for handouts. Expecting others to clean up your mess." The homeless man said nothing. Charles shook his head as if lecturing a child. "You had the same opportunities as anyone else in this country. But instead of working hard, you let life beat you down. Look at you, wasting space, wasting oxygen." Megan looked down, uncomfortable, as did several pedestrians who had stopped nearby. Still, the homeless man didn't speak. He simply listened. Charles went on, his voice growing more animated as his audience grew. "This country rewards winners, not losers. I started with nothing. Nothing." He raised his voice dramatically. "You know how many hours I worked? How many nights I didn't sleep? You know what it takes to build a billion-dollar empire? Sacrifice. Discipline. Vision." The man on the ground blinked but still remained silent. Charles leaned forward now, almost enjoying the humiliation. "You probably blame the government, blame society, blame the economy. But let's be honest, people like you always find someone to blame for your own failures." A few gasps could be heard from onlookers. Several people began filming openly now. Megan whispered urgently, "Sir, maybe we should go." But Charles ignored her, eyes locked on the man before him. "Tell me something," he smirked, "what's your excuse? Why are you out here? Drugs? Alcohol? Laziness? Or just plain stupidity?" For the first time, the homeless man moved. He lifted his head slightly, his voice calm but steady. "No excuse," he said quietly. "I served my country." His words cut through the noise like a blade. Charles laughed bitterly, mocking him. "Oh, please. Served your country? And what, ended up here? Sitting on the sidewalk like trash? If you were really worth anything, you wouldn't be out here right now." More people were gathering now, watching the scene unfold. Some murmured in disgust at Charles's words. Others simply stared, recording every second. One young woman whispered to her friend, "That's Charles Whitaker, this is going viral." But Charles didn't seem to care. He was so blinded by his own ego that he didn't notice the man who had quietly stopped behind him, watching everything. A tall man in a sharp dark suit, wearing sunglasses, standing with his hands calmly folded in front of him. No one recognized him at first. But his presence carried a quiet authority. Charles, still focused on the homeless veteran, spat one final insult. "You're nothing but a disgrace. A stain on society. If I were you, I wouldn't show my face in public. You make people like me sick." The homeless man simply stared up at him, expression unchanged. Then, the man in the dark suit behind Charles took a small step forward. The atmosphere shifted instantly. People began whispering as they noticed him. One older man in the crowd widened his eyes, recognizing who was standing there. It was Director Alan Grayson. The director of the FBI. The air around them grew tense, though Charles Whitaker was still blissfully unaware. His self-satisfaction blinded him to the shift in atmosphere. His voice remained loud, arrogant, and filled with contempt. "Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunities you've wasted?" Charles sneered. "Do you have any idea how many men and women crawl their way up from nothing? Yet here you are, a grown man, begging like a child." The homeless veteran said nothing. His eyes, however, flickered briefly toward the man standing silently behind Charles. The FBI director hadn't spoken yet. He simply observed, his face calm, but his eyes sharp and piercing. Charles took another step forward, towering over the veteran, using his size to intimidate him even more. "Look around," Charles hissed, gesturing to the crowd. "Do you see anyone here who respects you? Do you see anyone here who sees you as anything but trash? I bet even your own family gave up on you. That's why you're sitting here." The veteran blinked but remained silent. The onlookers were now visibly uncomfortable. Some were shaking their heads. Others murmured in anger at Charles's cruelty. "Come on," Charles continued, his voice dripping with venom. "Tell me. How many years has it been since someone looked at you like a human being? 10 years? 20? The veteran finally spoke again, softly but firmly. "I didn't ask for your pity." Charles let out a mocking laugh. "Pity? Pity is for people who deserve a second chance. You don't. You threw your life away, and now you're just a stain on the sidewalk." The crowd gasped. Several people lowered their phones, clearly disturbed by how far Charles was going. A young man in the crowd whispered, "This guy's insane. He's actually bullying a homeless veteran on camera." Charles kept going, his voice growing louder, feeding off his own cruelty. "You want to know the difference between you and me?" he shouted. "I built my empire. I earned my billions. I didn't sit around waiting for someone to feel sorry for me. That's why I have private jets, mansions, and power, while you have a pile of dirty clothes and a cardboard sign." The veteran stayed calm. His composure frustrated Charles even more. "I can buy and sell people like you 1,000 times over." Charles yelled. You're beneath me. You're worthless. At that moment, a soft cough came from behind Charles. Finally, Director Alan Grayson broke his silence. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, his voice steady and commanding. Charles turned, surprised, irritated at being interrupted. "Yes? Who the hell are you?" he snapped without thinking. The director slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing his cold, focused eyes. His face was calm, but there was a weight to his words that silenced the entire street. "My name is Alan Grayson," he said. "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd fell completely silent. Several people gasped audibly. Some mouths dropped open. The energy on the street shifted like a sudden drop in temperature. Charles froze, his smirk evaporating instantly. The FBI director continued, his voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "I've been standing here for several minutes," Grayson said. "Listening. Watching. Observing the way you speak to this man." Charles's eyes darted around, suddenly aware that dozens of people were filming. The realization that the FBI director had witnessed everything sent a bolt of panic through his chest. "Director. I didn't mean," Charles stammered. The director raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Save your excuses." The crowd remained completely silent, all eyes locked on the unfolding confrontation. "This man you've spent the last 10 minutes humiliating, do you have any idea who he is?" Grayson asked, his voice calm but growing colder. Charles swallowed, now visibly sweating. He glanced nervously at the homeless man, who still sat quietly on the ground, watching. "He's a homeless man. I mean. I just..." Grayson's voice turned sharp. "No. He's not just a homeless man." The director turned slightly toward the crowd, ensuring everyone could hear him clearly. "This man is Staff Sergeant William Harper, United States Marine Corps. He served 3 combat tours overseas. 2 in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq. He was awarded the Silver Star for bravery. He saved the lives of 13 American soldiers in a firefight that nearly cost him his own life." The crowd gasped again. Grayson continued, his voice heavier with every word. "He sustained injuries that left him physically and emotionally scarred. After returning home, he struggled, as many of our veterans do, with PTSD, depression, and the overwhelming difficulty of transitioning back into civilian life." Charles's face went pale. Grayson now stepped closer to him, his piercing eyes never leaving Charles. "And while men like him were bleeding and sacrificing for this country halfway across the world, men like you were sitting in penthouses, profiting off stock markets, and lecturing people about hard work." Charles opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You dare to stand here and shame him?" Grayson continued. "You, who have never seen a battlefield, who have never once risked your life for your country, you insult a man who did exactly that." The crowd erupted into whispers, their disgust for Charles growing with every second. Grayson's voice dropped lower, deadlier. "You called him worthless," he said. "But let me be perfectly clear, if this country had more men like him and fewer men like you, we'd all be far better off." The words hit Charles like a slap across the face. His breathing grew shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His usual arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only panic. The FBI director then turned back toward Sergeant Harper, his tone softening. "Sergeant Harper," Grayson said respectfully, "on behalf of the United States government, and every American citizen, I thank you for your service and your sacrifice." The homeless veteran simply nodded, his voice still calm. "Thank you, sir." The crowd broke into quiet applause. Some people even wiped tears from their eyes. The shift in mood was overwhelming. But Grayson wasn't finished with Charles. He turned back toward the billionaire, whose hands were now shaking slightly. "And as for you, Mr. Whitaker," Grayson said coldly. You're going to learn a very important lesson today. Charles opened his mouth again to speak, but nothing came out. His face was drained of color. His confidence had fully collapsed. The director leaned in closer. There are cameras everywhere. Hundreds of witnesses. And your reputation, well, let's just say it won't survive what's about to go viral. He glanced at the people recording. You enjoy being famous, Mr. Whitaker? You're about to be very famous. The street was buzzing with an electricity that couldn't be contained. The bystanders whispered among themselves as phones remained fixed on the scene, capturing every humiliating second of Charles Whitaker's downfall. Charles's once proud face was now pale, flushed with panic and sweat. The mighty CEO, who just moments ago was mocking and humiliating a homeless veteran, now stood frozen under the intense stare of the FBI director and the eyes of dozens of spectators. Director Alan Grayson let his words hang in the air, allowing the full weight of the moment to crush Charles's arrogance. The veteran, Sergeant William Harper, remained seated, his dignity fully restored without having to speak another word. Grayson finally spoke again, his voice deliberate. You thought you were humiliating him, Mr. Whitaker, he said. But in truth, you've only humiliated yourself. The crowd murmured in agreement. One man whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Finally, someone putting these arrogant billionaires in their place. Charles tried to regain his composure. His hands trembled slightly as he attempted to smooth out his expensive suit jacket. Director Grayson, Charles stammered. I didn't know who he was. I swear. If I had known. Grayson interrupted sharply, raising his hand, and that's exactly the problem, Mr. Whitaker. You believe that respect should only be reserved for people whose status you recognize. You believe power defines worth. That wealth equals dignity. He paused, letting that truth pierce directly into Charles's heart. But you've forgotten one of the core values that this nation was built upon, Grayson continued. Every person, regardless of status, wealth, or uniform, deserves basic human dignity. The applause from the crowd grew louder. Charles's mouth quivered. He tried to shift blame. Director, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply abusing your perceived superiority. Grayson cut him off again. On camera. In public. To a decorated war hero. The director's voice hardened further. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions speak for themselves. Charles's breathing quickened. His world was collapsing right before his eyes. He could feel the stares, the judgment, the disgust radiating from the crowd. A young woman nearby shook her head, saying to her friend. Unbelievable, he treated a veteran like garbage. What kind of person does that? The friend replied, his company's done. He'll never recover from this. Suddenly, a reporter from a local news station, who had arrived amidst the commotion, stepped forward with her cameraman. Director Grayson, she called out, may I ask, will the FBI be opening any investigation into Mr. Whitaker or his company? Charles's eyes widened in sheer terror. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Grayson glanced briefly at Charles, then addressed the reporter without hesitation. Let's just say, certain ongoing investigations may now receive renewed attention. The crowd reacted with audible gasps. People whispered feverishly as cameras zoomed in on Charles's panic-stricken face. One elderly man muttered. Karma's real. You reap what you sow. Charles's head spun. The very thought of federal investigations, audits, subpoenas, criminal charges, filled him with dread. His empire, which had taken decades to build, was now teetering on the edge of total ruin. Director, please, Charles pleaded, his voice now desperate. You have to understand. This will destroy me. Grayson's expression remained cold. Mr. Whitaker, he said, you should have thought about that before you publicly humiliated an American hero. Suddenly, Sergeant Harper, who had remained silent through most of this confrontation, slowly rose to his feet. The crowd respectfully stepped back to give him space. The decorated veteran, once homeless and broken, now stood tall and dignified before the very man who tried to shame him. He spoke softly but with undeniable strength. "You judged me for my appearance," Harper said. "You assumed my worth based on my clothes, my circumstances, and my pain. But you never bothered to ask about my story, my sacrifice, or my scars." The crowd fell completely silent, hanging on to every word. Harper continued, his voice growing firmer. "You see rags. You see weakness. But these rags? They carry the weight of battles you've never fought. They carry the faces of brothers I lost on the battlefield." He paused briefly, his voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't choose this life after war. But I never asked anyone to feel sorry for me. All I ever wanted was to be treated like a human being." Tears welled up in several bystanders' eyes. Some clutched their chests as Harper's words struck deep. Harper looked Charles directly in the eyes. "You tried to strip me of my dignity, Mr. Whitaker. But you never had that power to begin with." The applause erupted. People began chanting softly. "Respect. Respect." Grayson nodded in approval, allowing Harper's words to stand as a powerful indictment. But the moment wasn't over yet. From behind the crowd, several black SUVs suddenly pulled up. A team of FBI agents stepped out, their expressions serious, their badges gleaming in the sunlight. One of the lead agents approached Director Grayson and whispered in his ear. Grayson nodded, then turned toward Charles. "Mr. Whitaker," he said firmly. "As of this moment, you are being formally notified that your financial records are under investigation. Federal agents will be visiting your offices shortly." Charles's legs buckled slightly. His world spun uncontrollably. "No, no, please. Director, I can fix this. I'll make a donation, I'll fund veteran programs. Anything. Just, don't do this." The desperation in his voice was raw, pathetic. The arrogant CEO was now reduced to begging, not unlike the man he had just finished humiliating. Grayson's voice turned even colder. "Your money won't save you this time, Mr. Whitaker. You've made your choices." The cameras captured every second. News outlets were already live-streaming the downfall of one of America's most powerful businessmen. Suddenly, a young boy standing next to his father spoke aloud, his innocent voice cutting through the air. "Daddy, why was the rich man so mean to the soldier?" The father kneeled down and gently answered. "Because son, sometimes people forget that real strength isn't in money or power, it's in character." The crowd nodded in agreement. Charles dropped his head in utter shame. His confident smirk, the one he had worn so easily earlier, was completely gone. The mighty billionaire now looked small, broken, and humiliated. Director Grayson turned one final time to address the crowd. "Let this serve as a reminder to everyone here," he said. "Wealth does not equal worth. Titles do not grant dignity. And no man, no matter how powerful, has the right to strip another of his humanity." The crowd erupted into loud applause. Tears, cheers, and cameras captured the moment that would soon go viral around the world. As the FBI agents escorted Charles toward one of the black SUVs, his face reflected only one emotion now, absolute regret. The man who once thought himself untouchable had finally learned the most painful lesson of his life. The media storm erupted like a wildfire. By the time the black FBI SUVs pulled away with Charles Whitaker seated inside, his face plastered across every news channel, every major headline in America carried only one name that night. Billionaire CEO humiliates homeless veteran, FBI launches criminal investigation. The footage of the incident went viral almost instantly. Millions across the country, and soon, across the world, watched as the once mighty CEO was publicly shamed for his cruelty, arrogance, and cold disregard for basic human dignity. Social media exploded with fury. Hashtag Justice for Veteran. Hashtag Whitaker exposed. Hashtag Respect all humans. The hashtags trended globally within hours. Prominent journalists, celebrities, and politicians condemned Charles's behavior, while veterans' organizations called for an official federal review of his company's dealings. Entire online communities rallied behind Sergeant William Harper, praising his dignity, courage, and silent strength. TV networks played the clip of Director Grayson confronting Charles over and over, becoming a symbol of poetic justice. Powerful men fall the hardest when they forget the value of basic respect, one commentator declared on national television. Even late-night comedians tore into Charles's actions. One famous host quipped, "He spent years building his empire, but one moment of pure arrogance took him down faster than a stock market crash." The pressure mounted. Stockholders of Whitaker Enterprises panicked as the company's stock plummeted nearly 40% overnight. Investment firms pulled out. Corporate partners issued public statements distancing themselves. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting to discuss possible leadership changes. Inside his lavish Manhattan penthouse, Charles sat slumped on the edge of his designer couch, staring blankly at the endless barrage of news reports flashing across the multiple flat screens in front of him. His once confident eyes were now dark and hollow. A glass of whiskey trembled slightly in his hand. The phone kept ringing, lawyers, PR teams, board members, all frantically attempting damage control. His wife, Victoria, stood across the room, arms crossed tightly, her face full of disappointment and growing anger. "This isn't just a scandal, Charles," she snapped. "This is your entire legacy burning to the ground." Charles looked up slowly, his voice cracked. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Victoria glared. "You didn't mean to publicly humiliate a homeless war hero? You didn't mean to treat another human being like dirt because he didn't wear a $1,000 suit like you?" Her voice rose, fury and disgust dripping from every word. "You always thought you were untouchable, Charles. That your money could fix everything. But you forgot the one thing you can't buy, respect." Charles lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. Tears welled up as guilt crushed him like a weight he couldn't carry. Suddenly, his personal attorney burst into the room, breathless. "Charles, we have a real problem." "What now?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The SEC just froze several of your personal accounts. The IRS is opening a full audit. And," the lawyer paused, swallowing nervously, "we've received subpoenas for your offshore holdings." Victoria gasped in horror. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "It gets worse," the lawyer added. "Your board is calling for your immediate resignation. They want you out by morning." Charles's chest tightened. The empire he had built over decades, ruthless deal after ruthless deal, was now collapsing like a house of cards. He whispered, "All because of one stupid moment, one stupid homeless man." The lawyer shot him a sharp look. "No, Charles. All because of your arrogance. That man, that veteran, he showed more class in 5 minutes than you have in your entire career." Victoria stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Meanwhile, across town, Sergeant William Harper sat inside a modest hotel room provided by the city's Veteran Affairs Office. The room was simple but warm, far better than the cold, dangerous streets he had endured for years. For the first time in ages, he had a soft bed, clean clothes, and hot food. But more than anything, he had dignity again. As he sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed with endless messages of support, strangers offering kind words, job offers, housing assistance, even donations. But William remained humble. He stared at a faded photo on the bedside table, him in uniform, surrounded by his brothers in arms, smiling under the harsh sun of a foreign battlefield. His eyes misted. He whispered softly to the picture, "You boys would be proud." There was a knock on the door. William opened it to find Director Alan Grayson standing there, his expression warm. "Director," William nodded. Grayson smiled. "May I come in?" "Of course." They sat across from each other at the small table. Grayson spoke first. "William, I just wanted to check on you personally." "I'm doing better than I've done in years, sir." "Thanks to you." Grayson shook his head humbly. "No, William. Thanks to your strength." He paused before continuing. "The president himself called me. He saw the footage. He wants to meet you personally, to thank you for your service and your strength during all of this." William's eyes widened. "The president?" Grayson smiled. "That's right. And that's not all. The Department of Veterans Affairs is fast-tracking your full benefits, retroactive pay, and a permanent housing program." William's voice trembled. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Grayson replied. "You earned every bit of it." There was a long silence. A powerful silence full of mutual respect. Finally, William spoke. "You know, Director, even after losing my home, my job, and everything else, the hardest part was losing my dignity." Grayson nodded. "And now," William continued, "thanks to this, I've got it back." Grayson stood up, extending his hand. "You're a true American hero, Sergeant Harper. This country owes you a debt we can never repay." William stood, shook Grayson's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir." Back in the world of media frenzy, Charles Whitaker's face was everywhere: late-night satire, breaking news segments, angry talk shows, and investigative reports dissecting his crimes and corruption. Journalists dug up years of unethical business practices, labor violations, tax evasion, and backdoor lobbying deals. His carefully constructed image of a successful, self-made billionaire crumbled completely. Multiple employees came forward revealing hostile workplace environments, toxic leadership, and illegal company practices. The internet now referred to Charles Whitaker as the man who mocked a hero. But there was one final twist in this saga. The following week, a special congressional hearing was held on Capitol Hill. Director Grayson was called to testify on corruption within major corporations. Sitting directly behind him, receiving a standing ovation as he entered the chamber, was Sergeant William Harper, now proudly wearing a crisp, new suit gifted to him by grateful supporters. News cameras flashed as Grayson's opening statement echoed across America. "This nation must remember," Grayson said powerfully, "that no man's wealth, power, or corporate empire gives him the right to strip dignity from another human being. We must stand as guardians for those who've sacrificed for our freedoms." William's eyes glistened with emotion. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer homeless. He was now a symbol, a living reminder of the power of humility, dignity, and justice. The days that followed saw Charles Whitaker descending into a nightmare far beyond what he could have ever imagined. Federal prosecutors officially filed criminal charges against him: tax fraud, insider trading, obstruction of justice, labor law violations, and money laundering. The once untouchable billionaire, who used to boast about owning private islands, mega yachts, and skyscrapers, now stood in front of cameras, escorted by federal agents in handcuffs. The image of Charles being walked into a federal courthouse, his head down, his face drained of color, became the defining photograph of the fall of an empire. Media outlets dubbed him the fallen king of Wall Street. The lavish apartment? Seized. The private jets? Confiscated. His frozen bank accounts? Emptied. His wife Victoria filed for divorce, citing irreparable betrayal and disgrace. Even his adult children publicly distanced themselves, deleting their social media accounts and issuing statements of disapproval. But the most crushing blow came during his court hearings. As the courtroom filled with reporters, federal agents, and lawyers, a familiar figure entered quietly, sitting directly behind the prosecution bench. Sergeant William Harper. Clean-cut, dignified, and calm. The man Charles once mocked, belittled, and humiliated now stood as a silent witness to justice unfolding. When Charles's eyes met William's, his lips quivered. For the first time, Charles didn't see a homeless janitor. He saw strength. He saw integrity. He saw the man who exposed his greatest weakness, his own heartless arrogance. The prosecutor stood and read out the charges in cold, meticulous detail. As the charges were listed, Charles's lawyer whispered in his ear. "Charles, we've lost. Take the plea deal, or face 30 years in federal prison." Charles swallowed hard. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman known for her zero tolerance of white-collar criminals, addressed him directly. "Mr. Whitaker, do you fully understand the severity of your crimes and the irreparable damage you've caused, not just to your company, but to the people whose lives you've destroyed?" Charles trembled. "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered. The judge continued. "And do you fully acknowledge that your actions on that fateful day, publicly humiliating a decorated veteran, were the catalyst for uncovering your years of deceit?" "Yes. Your Honor," he repeated, barely able to speak. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered her verdict. "In light of your guilty plea, this court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison." The gavel struck. The sentence was sealed. The mighty king of commerce had fallen, permanently. Outside the courtroom, cameras swarmed as William Harper stood before a growing sea of reporters. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he spoke with the same quiet dignity that had won the hearts of millions. "I never asked for revenge," William began, his voice steady, emotional. "I never asked for this man's empire to crumble. All I ever wanted was to be treated like a human being. Like a man who served this country with honor, only to fall on hard times. I wanted dignity." He paused, fighting back tears. "And today, dignity was restored, not just for me, but for every veteran, every working-class man and woman who's ever been made to feel invisible." The crowd erupted in applause. Many watching across America wiped tears from their eyes. Later that evening, Director Alan Grayson invited William Harper to a private dinner along with key government officials who had been instrumental in the investigation. Seated at the grand table in a secure federal building, William couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. A man who had once slept on cold sidewalks was now being honored at the highest levels of government. Grayson raised his glass for a toast. "To Sergeant William Harper, for reminding us all what true character looks like." Everyone clinked glasses. William spoke softly. "I may have lost years of my life, but I gained something far more important. I gained my voice back." Grayson smiled. And the entire country heard it loud and clear. The ripple effect of the scandal extended far beyond Charles Whitaker's personal downfall. Congress passed new legislation strengthening protections for veterans transitioning back into civilian life. The Harper Act, as it was named, allocated billions in federal funding for housing, job placement, mental health services, and education programs for veterans. William was invited to stand beside the president as the bill was signed into law. The nation watched live as cameras captured the president placing a hand on William's shoulder and saying, "Sergeant Harper, your resilience inspired change that will benefit millions. You are a hero not only on the battlefield, but here at home." Tears welled in William's eyes as the room erupted into applause. Months later, William stood at the groundbreaking ceremony of a brand new veteran housing center, fully funded by public and private donations that poured in after his story went viral. The ribbon was cut. New homes were built. Veterans moved in, many with their families, many finally escaping the very homelessness William once faced. And standing beside him was his daughter Emily, who had recently reunited with him after years of separation. She wrapped her arm around her father, her voice full of pride. "You did it, Dad. You turned pain into purpose." William smiled through tears. "I didn't do it alone." Meanwhile, behind cold prison walls, Charles Whittaker sat alone inside his tiny gray cell. Gone were the luxury linens, five-star chefs, and ocean view balconies. Now, steel bars and cold concrete defined his world. The words of Director Grayson echoed endlessly in his mind. "You judged a man by his clothes, not by his character." In the end, two men walked completely different paths. One lost everything because of unchecked ego and cruelty. The other, despite losing everything, found redemption, respect, and national admiration. Months passed. The media storm slowly settled, but the legacy of what had happened continued to echo across the country. Charles Whittaker remained inside federal prison, his name permanently stained. Business schools began teaching his downfall as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, arrogance, and a complete disregard for human dignity. His company, Whittaker Enterprises, was dissolved. Assets were liquidated. Competitors devoured the pieces of his former empire like vultures. And while Charles sat behind bars, counting every endless minute, America moved forward, but it never forgot. Across the nation, millions of people who had once been invisible, homeless veterans, janitors, minimum wage workers, blue-collar laborers, found a new symbol of hope in one man. Sergeant William Harper. The man who stood tall, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of character. 1 year later, William Harper was invited to give a keynote speech at the National Conference for Veterans and Workers' Rights in Washington, D.C. The massive convention center was packed. Thousands in attendance. Millions watching live from across the country. As William stepped onto the stage, wearing a sharp suit, no longer weighed down by poverty, the entire crowd rose to its feet, offering him a long-standing ovation. The applause was deafening. William stood at the podium, took a deep breath, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago, I was a homeless man, sweeping floors to survive. I was invisible to society, to people who would pass me every single day without even noticing I existed." The audience listened in complete silence. Until one man decided I was beneath him. He paused, his voice steady but emotional. He humiliated me. Mocked me. Stripped me of my dignity, not because of who I was, but because of what I wore. Because of where I stood in life. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But what that man didn't know, was that I had already stood on far more dangerous grounds. William's voice grew stronger. I had stood on foreign soil, under enemy fire, defending freedoms many take for granted. I wore the uniform of this great nation. I watched brothers and sisters in arms sacrifice their lives for people they would never even meet. He paused, his voice trembling with emotion. And yet, when I came home, I became invisible. The entire room was silent, many wiping away tears. But on that day, when I was humiliated publicly, something remarkable happened. He smiled gently. The people of this nation, you, stood up for me. The audience erupted in another round of applause. Because of your voices, because of your compassion, today I stand here no longer invisible. Today, I have my dignity back. And today, millions of veterans, homeless workers, and struggling Americans know, your worth is not determined by your job title or your bank account. The crowd roared. William held up a small framed photo. It was his old army unit, the brothers he had served with overseas. I carry them with me always, he said, his voice cracking. They are the reason I never gave up. The camera zoomed in, broadcasting his tears to millions. He continued. And to those who sit in positions of power, in corner offices, on corporate boards, in halls of government, remember this. He leaned forward. The people you dismiss today, may be the very ones who hold your fate tomorrow." The room thundered with applause again, this time with standing ovation. Watching from his prison cell, Charles Whittaker sat alone, his face pale as he saw William's speech replayed on the tiny prison television. He turned the volume down, unable to bear hearing the applause, the admiration, the respect that he could never reclaim. Tears streamed silently down his face. For the first time in his life, Charles truly felt something he never expected. Regret. Deep, crushing regret. Regret for the years of arrogance. Regret for choosing money over humanity. Regret for mocking a man who had more honor in one day than he had in a lifetime. He whispered into the silence of his cell. "I destroyed myself." The weight of his own words crushed him as he buried his face into his hands. Meanwhile, William Harper's story inspired sweeping change across America. Nonprofits and government programs surged in funding. Homeless shelters were expanded. Mental health services for veterans increased dramatically. Corporations began launching internal audits to ensure fair treatment of low-wage workers. Public schools began teaching the Harper case as a moral lesson on dignity, respect, and humility. News anchors regularly revisited the iconic footage of Director Grayson stepping in between Charles and William, the moment that changed it all. 2 years later, William opened the doors to a brand new foundation. The Harper Institute for Dignity and Veteran Empowerment. The building stood tall, funded entirely by private donations, government grants, and corporate sponsors who wanted to support the very cause Charles once dismissed. Inside, hundreds of veterans and displaced workers received job training, mental health support, housing assistance, and educational scholarships. William personally mentored many of them. And each morning, he would walk through the halls, greet every person by name, offer them encouragement, and remind them, "You matter." On opening day, Director Grayson visited him again. They stood side by side, overlooking the massive facility bustling with hope and life. Grayson smiled proudly. "You've turned tragedy into legacy, William." William nodded, eyes filled with gratitude. "I only did what any decent person should have done, sir." Grayson placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Not everyone would have stood with such grace after what you endured. The country needed someone like you." William chuckled softly. "And all of it started because one man judged me by my uniform, or lack of one." Grayson nodded. "And now, you wear the greatest uniform of all, dignity." They stood quietly for a moment, as the American flag fluttered gently in the breeze above the building. Back in prison, Charles Whittaker, older now, sat quietly in the prison library reading a well-worn copy of Leadership and Humility, a book that had ironically quoted his downfall. He was no longer the feared titan of business. Now, he was simply inmate number 44729. And though he sat among dozens of other inmates, none dared to speak to him. He lived in constant solitude, haunted not by his loss of wealth, but by the gaping void where his soul once lived. Every night, before lights out, he would stare at the cracks on the ceiling and hear echoes in his mind. You judged a man by his job, not by his worth. The end.